Every human knows they will die, yet most of us spend our entire lives avoiding that thought. We distract ourselves with work, relationships, screens, and routines, not because we're busy, but because our brain is quietly protecting us. Neuroscience shows that the human mind is not designed to face its own ending directly. In this video, we'll explore why the fear of death shapes human behavior, how the brain reacts to mortality, and how this hidden fear silently controls our decisions, without us ever noticing. Chapter 1. The thought we all avoid. Every human being shares one certainty. No matter where we are born, what language we speak, or how we live our lives, we all know that one day we will die. And yet, this is the one thought most people spend their entire lives trying not to think about. Death is not rare. It surrounds us in news headlines, movies, history books, and personal loss. But when it comes to our own mortality, something strange happens. The human mind looks away, not because we are ignorant, not because we are unintelligent, but because the brain has learned that some thoughts are too powerful to sit with for too long. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you truly stopped and reflected on your own death? Not in a dramatic way, not as a joke, but seriously. Most people can't remember, and if they can, they remember feeling uncomfortable almost immediately. The heart rate changes, the mind feels heavy, a quiet tension appears. So, what do? We distract ourselves. We check our phones, we open another app, we focus on work, plans, responsibilities, or entertainment. We tell ourselves we're too busy to think about things like that. But psychology tells us something important. Busyness is often not productivity, it is avoidance. Humans are the only species on Earth that knows, with certainty, that life will end. Animals experience danger, they experience fear. But they do not sit quietly and imagine their own future death. Humans do, and that awareness changes everything. This ability to imagine the future is one of our greatest strengths, but it also comes with a cost. Because when the human brain imagines its own non-existence, it faces something it was never designed to fully process. The absence of self, no thoughts, no memories, no control. There's a famous psychological experiment where participants were subtly reminded of death, sometimes through simple questions, sometimes through short writing tasks about mortality. What happened next was fascinating. People didn't panic, they didn't cry, instead, they changed behavior. They defended their beliefs more strongly, they became more attached to their identities. They sought meaning, structure, and validation. Without realizing it, their minds were trying to protect them, not from death itself, but from the fear of thinking about it. This is why death avoidance rarely looks like fear. It looks like ambition. It looks like distraction. It looks like constant movement. Modern life gives us endless ways to avoid stillness, and stillness is where mortality thoughts live. When everything is quiet, the mind turns inward. And when the mind turns inward, it sometimes asks questions with no comforting answers. So, we keep moving. Notice how uncomfortable silence can feel. Waiting in a room with nothing to do, sitting alone without a screen, lying awake at night with no distractions. These moments are not dangerous, yet many people avoid them. Because silence removes the noise that keeps deeper thoughts buried. And among those thoughts is one the brain has learned to suppress. This won't last forever. From a psychological perspective, this avoidance is not weakness, it is protection. The human brain evolved to keep us alive, not to help us calmly accept our own ending. If early humans spent too much time thinking about death, they wouldn't hunt, build, reproduce, or protect their group. So evolution shaped a mind that says, focus on now, focus on survival. Avoid what threatens stability, even if that threat is only a thought. This is why fear of death is rarely conscious. Most people don't wake up afraid of dying. Instead, they wake up with anxiety, restlessness, or the feeling that they must do something, achieve something, become something, leave something behind, and often, they don't know why. In psychology, fear doesn't always appear as terror. Sometimes it appears as motivation. Sometimes it appears as ambition. Sometimes it appears as the inability to slow down. And Chapter 2, How the Brain Reacts to Mortality. The human brain is an extraordinary organ. It can imagine the future, remember the past, and create meaning from experience. But when it comes to death, the brain does something very specific. It treats the idea of mortality not as a philosophical question, but as a threat. When the brain detects danger, it doesn't ask for logic or explanation. It reacts. This reaction happens in a small, almond-shaped structure deep inside the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is not responsible for deep thinking or reflection. Its job is simple: detect threat, trigger survival. Whether the danger is a speeding car, a loud noise, or the thought of your own death, the amygdala responds in almost the same way. Neuroscience studies have shown something surprising. When people are exposed to reminders of death, even subtle ones, brain activity increases in regions associated with fear and stress. Not because death is happening, but because the brain believes it could. To the survival system, imagining death is dangerously close to experiencing it. Once the amygdala is activated, it sends signals throughout the body. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are released. Heart rate changes. Muscles tense slightly, attention narrows. This is the fight or flight response, a system designed to protect us from predators, now activated by a thought. This is why thinking about death can feel physically uncomfortable. The brain doesn't separate abstract ideas from real danger very well. It asks only one question: is this threatening survival? And the answer, when death enters the mind, is always yes. At the same time, another part of the brain becomes quieter. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, reasoning, and emotional regulation, reduces activity under threat. This means something important. When death fear is triggered, we don't think more clearly, we think more defensively. We become less open, less reflective, and more reactive. This is not a flaw, it is a survival feature. Imagine early humans thousands of years ago. A person who calmly analyzed danger instead of reacting quickly did not survive long. So evolution favored brains that reacted first and thought later. The problem is, this same system now reacts to ideas, not just physical threats. Modern humans rarely face life-threatening danger daily, but the brain hasn't updated its fear software. So, when mortality appears in thought, the ancient survival system responds as if something terrible is about to happen. And the fastest way to stop that discomfort is avoidance. This is why many people instinctively push death-related thoughts away, not because they are weak, not because they are afraid in a dramatic sense, but because their brain is trying to restore emotional balance. It wants safety, and safety, to the brain, means not thinking about dying. Brain imaging studies show that when people distract themselves after mortality reminders, stress-related activity decreases. The brain learns something important: distraction works, so it repeats the behavior. Over time, this creates a habit. Death thought appears, gives discomfort, gives distraction, gives relief. This loop becomes automatic. This is also why logical reassurance often doesn't help. You can tell yourself, death is natural. Everyone dies. There's nothing happening right now. But the amygdala doesn't understand logic. It understands signals, and the signal it receives is, survival is threatened. Interestingly, children don't fear death the same way adults do. Young children may ask about death with curiosity, not anxiety. Fear develops later, when identity, future planning, and self-awareness become stronger. As the sense of I grows, so does the fear of losing it. The stronger the identity, the louder the alarm. This explains why mortality fear often increases during certain life stages: midlife, moments of illness, loss of loved ones, quiet periods of reflection. These moments weaken distraction, and the brain reacts. But here's something important. The brain is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is protecting continuity, the sense that I will continue, and death represents the end of that continuity, so the brain resists it. Understanding this changes how we view fear of death. It's not irrational, it's not weakness. It's not something to be ashamed of. It is the result of millions of years of evolution meeting human self-awareness. As we move forward, we'll explore why evolution made this fear necessary, and how avoiding mortality actually helps humans survive and build civilization. Because once we understand why the fear exists, we can begin to relate to it differently. Chapter 3. Why evolution made fear of death necessary. To understand why humans fear death, we must step far back in time, long before modern life, before cities, before language as we know it. We must go back to a world where survival was uncertain, danger was constant, and a single mistake could end a life. In that world, fear was not a weakness, fear was life itself. Early humans did not sit and reflect on meaning or philosophy. They lived moment to moment, surrounded by predators, harsh climates, and limited resources. Every sound in the dark mattered, every unfamiliar movement carried risk, and in this environment, the individuals who survived were not the bravest, but the most cautious. Fear kept them alive. From an evolutionary perspective, death is the ultimate failure of survival. So nature shaped brains that strongly resisted anything associated with it. Not through conscious thought, but through automatic emotional responses. A mind that feared death avoided dangerous situations. A mind that avoided danger lived longer. A mind that lived longer passed on its genes. This is how fear became wired into the human nervous system. But something unique happened with humans. As our brains grew larger and more complex, we gained a new ability: foresight. We could imagine tomorrow, we could plan years ahead, and eventually, we could imagine our own ending. This was revolutionary, but it came with a cost. The survival system that evolved to protect us from immediate danger was never designed to handle abstract threats like future death. It knew how to respond to a predator, a fall, hunger, injury, but not to an idea. Yet the brain treats imagined danger as real. So when humans began to understand mortality, the fear system activated, without a clear way to shut it off. This created a psychological problem no other species faces. How do you live a functional life when you know it will end? Evolution's answer was not to remove fear, but to manage it. Instead of eliminating death anxiety, the brain learned to push it out of awareness. Natural selection. From an evolutionary standpoint, this was brilliant. People who felt connected to something larger were more motivated, more cooperative, more resilient. They survived longer, together. But here's where modern life complicates things. Evolution moves slowly, technology moves fast. The brain we use today was designed for a world that no longer exists, a world where danger was physical and immediate, not abstract and constant. Today, we are safer than ever, yet anxiety is widespread. Why? Because the brain is still scanning for threats. And when it doesn't find predators, it turns inward. Toward thoughts, toward uncertainty, toward mortality. This is why fear of death hasn't disappeared, even though life expectancy has increased. The fear is not about dying tomorrow. It's about knowing that dying is unavoidable. And the brain, designed to avoid endings, struggles with inevitability. Interestingly, evolutionary psychology shows that fear of death increases when survival feels uncertain. During illness, during instability, during major life changes. Because the survival system becomes more alert. This also explains why humans are driven to build families, create systems, accumulate knowledge, leave marks on the world. These behaviors are not just cultural. They are deeply biological. They are the mind's way of pushing back against impermanence. But avoidance has a side effect. When we avoid thinking about death too strongly, we also avoid thinking deeply about life. We stay busy, we stay distracted, we stay moving, because stopping forces reflection. And reflection leads back to the one thought evolution taught us to avoid. Fear of death, then, is not an enemy, it is a signal. A reminder of how deeply survival is wired into human behavior. It shaped our past, it built our civilizations, and it still guides our decisions, quietly. As we move forward, we'll explore how this fear transformed into complex psychological systems, how culture, identity, and beliefs became shields against mortality, and how a scientific theory explains this process in a powerful way. Chapter 4: Terror Management Theory. How the mind protects itself from death. By now, we understand something important. Humans fear death not because they think about it too much, but because the brain works hard to make sure they don't. But this raises a deeper question. If the fear of death is always present beneath the surface, how does the human mind continue functioning? How do people wake up every day, make plans, fall in love, build careers, and dream about the future, while knowing, at some level, that everything will end? Psychology offers a powerful answer. It's called terror management theory. Despite its dramatic name, terror management theory is not about panic or fear in the usual sense. It's about how humans manage the quiet terror of knowing they are mortal. The theory begins with a simple idea. When humans became aware of their own mortality, they faced a psychological conflict no other species experiences. We want to survive, but we know we won't. That conflict creates anxiety, and the mind must resolve it, or it would collapse under the weight of that knowledge. According to terror management theory, humans resolve this conflict by building meaning systems. These systems tell us who we are, why we matter, and how we fit into something larger than ourselves. They give life structure, and structure reduces fear. These meaning systems can take many forms: culture, beliefs, values, achievements, social roles, identity. Each one acts like a psychological shield against mortality awareness. When the mind feels grounded in meaning, death feels more distant, less threatening. Researchers discovered this theory through decades of experiments. In many studies, participants were subtly reminded of death, sometimes by asking them to write about mortality, sometimes through simple word associations. What happened afterward was revealing. People did not become visibly afraid. Instead, they became more attached to their beliefs. They defended their values more strongly. They favored people who shared their worldview. They distanced themselves from anything that challenged it. Why? Because when mortality becomes mentally active, the brain looks for stability. Beliefs provide stability. They tell the mind, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, this is why my life has meaning, and meaning calms fear. This explains something we see every day. When people feel threatened, not physically, but psychologically, terror management theory also explains why humans are deeply motivated by legacy. We want to be remembered, we want to matter, we want to leave something behind. Because if something of us continues, even symbolically, the fear of ending feels less absolute. This doesn't mean people are consciously afraid of dying. Most people never think, I'm doing this because I'm afraid of death. The process is subconscious. The mind simply moves toward whatever strengthens meaning and away from whatever threatens it. Consider how people react to criticism. When identity feels attacked, emotions rise quickly. This is not just ego, it's existential defense. If meaning collapses, fear returns. Terror management theory also helps explain why humans value order, rules, norms, traditions. They create predictability, and predictability feels safe. Interestingly, when people feel secure and supported, death anxiety decreases. Community matters, connection matters, belonging matters, because when the individual feels part of something larger, the fear of personal ending softens. But there's a downside. When people rely too heavily on meaning systems for psychological safety, they can become rigid, closed-minded, defensive, unwilling to question beliefs. Because questioning meaning feels dangerous, not intellectually, but emotionally. Chapter 5. How Fear of Death Shapes Everyday Decisions. Most people believe their daily decisions are driven by logic, goals, or personal preference. But psychology suggests something deeper. Beneath conscious choice, there is a quiet influence, one that rarely announces itself. The fear of death does not shout, it whispers. And yet, it shapes how people live, work, choose, and move through the world. Consider something simple. Why do people chase success, even when they are exhausted? Why do many continue working long hours, even after basic needs are met? From the outside, this looks like ambition. But psychologically, ambition often serves another role. It provides symbolic security. Achievement creates a sense of permanence. A promotion, a title, a reputation, these things make the mind feel stable. They tell the brain, I am someone, I matter, I exist in the world, and that sense of existence reduces mortality anxiety. Research shows that when people are reminded of death, they often become more focused on status and accomplishment, not because they suddenly want more, but because the mind seeks reassurance. Success becomes a way to push back against impermanence. The same pattern appears in money-related decisions. Financial security doesn't just protect against poverty. It protects against uncertainty, and uncertainty is closely linked to death anxiety. The more predictable life feels, the safer the mind feels. This also explains why many people avoid major life changes. Even when unhappy, staying in a familiar job, remaining in unhealthy relationships, avoiding new paths, not because they are weak, but because familiarity feels safe, and safety calms existential fear. Risk-taking follows an interesting pattern. Fear of death also influences relationships. Why do people crave connection? Because isolation makes mortality more visible. Being alone reminds the mind, you are an individual, and individuals end. Connection softens that awareness. Relationships create continuity. Family creates legacy. Love creates meaning. This is why loss is so destabilizing. When someone important disappears, it doesn't just create sadness, it removes a psychological buffer. Mortality feels closer, and the mind reacts strongly. Decision-making psychology shows that after experiences of loss, people often change priorities. They value time more, they seek meaning over achievement. They become more present, not because they are suddenly wiser, but because mortality awareness becomes unavoidable. Fear of death also shapes long-term planning. Retirement plans, health routines, life goals. These are not just practical. They are psychological attempts to control the future. control reduces fear. Interestingly, people who feel a strong sense of purpose experience less death anxiety. Purpose organizes life. It gives suffering context. It gives effort direction. Without purpose, mortality feels empty. With purpose, it feels tolerable. This chapter is not suggesting that all motivation comes from fear. Human behavior is complex. But ignoring the role of mortality creates an incomplete picture. The fear of death is not always visible, but it is often present. Understanding this doesn't make life darker. It makes behavior clearer. It explains why people cling to routines, why change feels difficult, why meaning matters more than pleasure. As we continue, we'll explore one of the most powerful coping strategies the mind uses to manage death fear: distraction. Because sometimes, the easiest way to escape a thought is to never allow its space to appear. Chapter 6: Distraction as a Psychological Defense in the Modern World. Humans are rarely alone with their thoughts. There is always something to check, something to watch, something to scroll. At first glance, this looks like entertainment, but psychology reveals something deeper. Much of what we call distraction is not pleasure, it is protection. The human mind has learned that certain thoughts create discomfort, thoughts about uncertainty, thoughts about meaning, thoughts about mortality. And the fastest way to escape discomfort is to shift attention. Distraction works quickly, and the brain remembers what works. Neuroscience shows that distraction activates the brain's reward system. Each notification, video, or piece of new information triggers a small release of dopamine. Dopamine doesn't create happiness, it creates movement. It pulls attention forward and away from reflection. This is why boredom feels uncomfortable. Not because there is nothing to do, but because the mind begins to wander. And when the mind wanders, it often moves toward deeper questions. Silence removes protection. Studies show that when people are left alone with nothing to do, anxiety increases. Not because the environment is dangerous, but because internal awareness increases. And with awareness comes existential thought. Distraction interrupts this process. It keeps attention external. It keeps the mind busy. And busyness keeps mortality out of focus. This is why many people feel uneasy when their phone battery dies. It's not just inconvenience, it's sudden exposure to stillness. Social media, entertainment, and constant stimulation offer psychological relief. They provide noise, novelty, movement, but rarely depth. Depth requires stillness, and stillness invites uncomfortable thoughts. Interestingly, distraction does not remove fear, it only delays it. The moment stimulation stops, the mind returns to baseline, and baseline often includes unresolved anxiety. This creates a cycle. Discomfort appears, distraction reduces it, the brain learns the pattern, and repeats it. Over time, the tolerance for stillness decreases. This explains why many people feel restless even during rest. Vacation without screens feels strange. Silence feels awkward, doing nothing feels wrong. Because the brain has learned to fear the absence of noise. From a psychological perspective, distraction is a defense mechanism. Not in a pathological way, but in a functional one. It helps people survive emotionally in a world where existential awareness is unavoidable. But like all defenses, it has limits. When distraction becomes constant, it prevents reflection. And reflection is how humans process meaning. Without reflection, life feels busy, but shallow. This is why people often report feeling empty despite being constantly occupied. The mind never gets space to integrate experience, and unresolved fear remains in the background. Understanding distraction helps us see modern behavior clearly. Humans are not addicted to screens because they are weak. They are drawn to stimulation because it quiets something deeper. As we continue, we'll explore why silence and stillness feel so uncomfortable and what happens inside the brain when external noise disappears. Because fear often appears not in chaos, but in quiet moments. Chapter 7. Why Silence and Stillness Feel Uncomfortable. There is a strange contradiction in modern life. Many people say they want peace, they want quiet, they want rest. But when silence actually arrives, it often feels uncomfortable, sometimes even unsettling. This reaction is not accidental, it is psychological. Silence removes stimulation, and when stimulation disappears, the mind turns inward. This inward attention activates a powerful brain system known as the default mode network. The default mode network becomes active when we are not focused on a task. It is the network responsible for self-reflection, memory, identity, imagination, existential thought. In simple terms, it is where the mind meets itself. When the default mode network becomes active, the brain begins to ask questions. Who am I? What does this mean? Where is my life going? And eventually, what happens when this ends? In silence, there is no external noise to block these questions, so they rise naturally. This is why silence feels different from rest. It creates awareness. Research shows that when people are placed in quiet environments without distractions, brain activity shifts dramatically. Areas associated with emotional processing and self-awareness become more active. This can be calming for some. But for many, it creates unease. The reason is simple. Silence allows mortality to enter awareness. Not dramatically, not consciously, but quietly. This explains why people often avoid stillness at night. Lying awake in bed, lights off, no distractions. The mind has nowhere to go, and so it turns toward unresolved thoughts. This is also why some people feel anxious during meditation. Meditation doesn't create anxiety, it reveals it. When distractions are removed, the mind confronts what has been avoided. Psychologists describe this as existential exposure, exposure to the self without filters. And the self, once fully aware, cannot ignore mortality. Humans are not afraid of silence itself, they are afraid of what silence reveals. Children, interestingly, often tolerate silence better than adults. Their sense of identity is still forming. Their future is abstract, their mortality awareness is limited. As self-awareness grows, silence becomes heavier. This is why modern environments are designed to reduce quiet. Background music, notifications, constant updates. Not just for entertainment, but for comfort. Silence reminds the mind that life is finite, and finiteness challenges the survival system. The brain asks, if this ends, what does it mean now? And meaning is not always easy to answer, but here is something important. Silence is not harmful, it is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things trigger the brain's alert system. When people slowly reintroduce stillness into their lives, discomfort often decreases. Not because mortality disappears, but because the mind learns that awareness is not danger. This is why acceptance-based therapies encourage gentle exposure to stillness. They teach the brain that awareness can exist without panic. In cultures that normalize reflection, silence is less threatening. Because meaning is shared, but in isolated environments, silence feels personal, and personal mortality feels heavier. Understanding silence helps us understand fear. Fear is not always loud. Sometimes it is what appears when nothing else is speaking. As we continue, we'll explore how different cultures manage death awareness, and why community, ritual, and shared meaning reduce existential fear, because fear is easier to carry together. This symbolic continuation reduces existential fear, because the mind can accept an ending if something remains. Modern societies often replace traditional symbolism with achievement, careers, recognition, legacy through work. These serve the same psychological role. They tell the mind, my existence matters beyond the present moment, but individual achievement cannot fully replace shared meaning, because meaning is strongest when it is collective. This is why loneliness increases death anxiety. When meaning is isolated, fear becomes heavier. Shared belief distributes emotional weight. Cultural differences reveal this clearly. Communities with strong collective identity report lower fear of death, not because they deny reality, but because they face it together. Modern individualism, while empowering, removes this buffer. Individuals are left to construct meaning alone, and not everyone knows how. Neuroscience supports this. Social connection reduces stress responses. Isolation increases threat perception. The brain is wired for shared survival. Culture also shapes how death is interpreted. As transition, as return, as transformation, as completion. The interpretation determines emotional response. The brain responds to narrative, not biology. Even scientific explanations function as cultural narratives. They provide structure. They reduce uncertainty. They give meaning to randomness. This is why understanding death intellectually does not remove fear, but understanding it culturally often does. When death is placed within a story, it becomes manageable. When it stands alone, it becomes overwhelming. This chapter reveals something important. Fear of death is not just inside the brain. Chapter 9, Healthy Ways the Mind Learns to Cope with Mortality. So far, we have explored something difficult, but honest. Fear of death is not a flaw. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is a natural response of a mind designed to survive in a world where survival is never guaranteed. But understanding fear is only the first step. The deeper question is this: how does the human mind learn to live with mortality without being controlled by it? Psychology offers an answer that is surprisingly calm. Not avoidance, not distraction, not denial, but acceptance. Acceptance does not mean liking death. It does not mean giving up on life. And it does not mean constant awareness. Acceptance means allowing the reality of mortality to exist without resistance. And this changes everything. From a brain science perspective, resistance increases fear. When the mind fights a thought, the thought becomes stronger. This is known as the ironic process theory. The more we try not to think about something, the more present it becomes. This is why suppression fails. Trying to push away death anxiety keeps the fear active in the background. The brain stays alert, always monitoring, always ready. Acceptance works differently. It tells the brain, this thought is not dangerous, and once the brain believes that, the alarm quiets. This principle is at the core of many modern psychological therapies, acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based approaches, existential psychology. Different methods, same insight. Awareness reduces fear when it is paired with safety. Studies show that people who can calmly acknowledge mortality experience lower anxiety, not higher, because the brain learns that awareness does not equal threat. This doesn't happen instantly. The survival system is cautious. It needs repetition, gentle exposure, safety signals. One powerful coping mechanism is meaning-focused living. Neuroscience shows that purposeful activity reduces stress responses. The brain shifts from threat mode to engagement mode. Engagement feels alive. Another healthy coping mechanism is presence. Not obsession with the present, but appreciation of it. When attention is grounded in the current moment, fear loses momentum. Because fear lives in imagined futures, presence does not deny the future. It simply refuses to live there constantly. Psychologists also highlight the role of self-compassion. Fear of death often brings secondary emotions: shame, guilt, judgment. People think, I shouldn't be afraid, I should be stronger. This judgment increases anxiety. Self-compassion reduces internal conflict. It tells the mind, this reaction is human, and that softens fear. Another powerful coping system is connection. Talking about mortality reduces its intensity. Shared awareness feels lighter than private fear. This is why support groups, deep conversations, and shared reflection are effective. Silence isolates fear, connection distributes it. Importantly, healthy coping does not mean constant reflection on death. It means allowing space when the thought arises, and returning to life when it passes. People who cope well with mortality do not think about death more, they think about it better. Research shows that individuals who accept mortality often report greater appreciation of time, stronger relationships, clearer priorities, less anxiety about small problems, not because they are fearless, but because fear no longer controls them. This is the paradox. Avoiding death makes life smaller. Accepting death often makes life fuller. This chapter is not about becoming unafraid. It is about becoming uncontrolled. Fear may still appear, but it no longer defines behavior. The human mind is capable of holding two truths at once. Life is finite. Life is meaningful. When these truths coexist, fear softens. In the final chapter, we'll explore how mortality awareness can deepen life, and how remembering death gently can lead to clarity, gratitude, and intentional living. Not dramatically, not obsessively, but humanly. Chapter 10. Living fully with mortality awareness. At some point in life, usually quietly, the human mind understands something clearly. Time is not endless. This realization does not arrive as panic for most people. It arrives as a pause, a subtle shift in perspective. And what happens next determines how a person lives. For much of human history, mortality awareness was not seen as a curse. It was seen as a guide, a reminder, a boundary that gave life shape. Modern life often tells us to forget death, to stay distracted, to stay busy, to stay moving. But psychology shows that forgetting mortality does not remove fear. It only removes clarity. There is a difference between avoiding death and remembering life. Mortality awareness, when approached gently, does not make life darker. It makes it sharper. People who have faced death closely, through illness, loss, or near-death experiences, often report the same shift. Small worries lose importance. Time becomes valuable. Presence increases. This is not because they became fearless. It is because illusion disappeared. Psychologists call this mortality salience with integration. Awareness without panic, acceptance without obsession. When the mind integrates mortality, fear no longer needs to control behavior. Instead of asking, how do I avoid death? The mind begins to ask, how do I live well? This shift changes everything. Decisions become intentional. Relationships become meaningful. Time becomes precious. Not because death is always present, but because life is. Living with mortality awareness does not mean thinking about death every day. It means understanding that time has limits and choosing accordingly. Many people spend years preparing for a future that never arrives, always waiting, always postponing. Mortality awareness interrupts this pattern. It asks, if not now, when? This awareness does not demand urgency. It invites honesty. Neuroscience shows that when people focus on values rather than fear, the brain shifts out of threat mode. Stress decreases, attention stabilizes, emotional regulation improves, the mind feels grounded. Living fully does not require grand achievements. It requires alignment between time, values, and action. This is why people who accept mortality often simplify their lives. They choose depth over noise, connection over status, presence over distraction. Not because they stopped caring, but because they started caring clearly. Fear of death shrinks life when it is avoided, but when it is understood, it expands it. This is the paradox at the heart of human psychology. The very thing we fear most can teach us how to live. Living fully with mortality awareness means allowing silence without panic, facing uncertainty without collapse, choosing meaning over avoidance. It means understanding that fear will still appear, but it does not need to be obeyed. The goal is not to conquer fear, the goal is to coexist with it. Human beings were never meant to live without fear, they were meant to live with awareness. When awareness replaces avoidance, life slows down. Moments feel real, time feels earned, connection feels deep. This is not a philosophy. It is a psychological truth. The mind relaxes when it no longer needs to hide. And perhaps this is the quiet conclusion the human brain has been searching for. Not that life lasts forever, but that it matters because it doesn't. Fear of death does not disappear when ignored. It softens when respected, and when fear softens, life opens. We are not afraid of death because life is fragile. We are afraid because life is meaningful. And when we finally understand that, we stop running and start living. If you enjoyed this deep exploration of the human mind, subscribe to Mind Patterns Lab, like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay curious.